Are back, baby. Back in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and back with the van. 1 month after driving all the way to Pennsylvania and having the van totally break down, not only is it hopefully, supposedly fixed and finished, but we've returned to Pennsylvania. I went down to Emery Transmissions this morning here in Harrisburg, and even though just as I left it, the inside is still pretty much in awful shape. What a mess. The old random van fired right up, shifted like vans are supposed to, and now, finally, without any plan whatsoever, we are going to be back on the road. And rather than sitting in the hotel today and recovering from jet lag, I've decided, weather permitting that is, to make our last stop of the last trip our first stop of this trip, and we're heading back down the highway to Gettysburg. So far, so good with the van. I don't have any firm plans for the next couple of days. I think I might play it safe and stay within safe towing distance of the transmission shop just to make sure it's all cool, but at least at the moment, the van's running like a champ. Now you may be wondering, why Gettysburg again? After all, we were just here looking at the battlefield, walking the site of Pickett's charge, checking out the battlefield. After all, what's left to see here? Well, first of all, there's a never-ending supply of stuff to see here in Gettysburg, like this statue of Abraham Lincoln that was missing last time I was here and has recently been replaced, giving directions to the modern man and pointing out the house he stayed in here as he gave his Gettysburg address, which the modern man is holding. And by modern man, I mean a late 20th century tourist, or maybe Mr. Rogers, judging by the sweater. But I didn't just come down here for the statuary. This weekend, as I stand here, marks the exact 159th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, which started on July 1st, 1863, and 158 years ago today, almost to the hour, saw the Union forces retreat and pull back through the town. 159 years ago, this would have been a scene of absolute chaos. The Confederates had been here earlier, demanding supplies and raiding the town. Now the townspeople were darting to and fro, frightened, hoping the Yankees would save them from the approaching Confederate army. They would have heard shelling and cannon fire and rifle shots everywhere. Wounded Union soldiers were being dragged into town and set up at makeshift field hospitals. And the modern Chambersburg here, which leads off to the west where the battlefield was, would have been the site of absolute chaos, confusion, and fear, especially over here at this 7-Eleven where the Eagle Hotel once stood, which was the headquarters of Brigadier General John Buford, whose cavalry began the engagements with the Confederates here and who is regarded as being the guy who selected this as the place to fight. Pretty exciting stuff when you consider this is the exact anniversary and the exact place you would have had messengers galloping up and down this road, bringing information back and forth. And like I mentioned, Union soldiers making their way back into town from the battlefield, being put up even in some of these exact houses, like this one right here that was here during the Civil War. It would have been absolutely insane. Literally, these houses are some of the very ones that Union soldiers trying to retreat through the town hid in some of the basements and coal cellars and cabinets and closets under the beds as the rebel army made their way into town, fighting street by street, alley by alley. And no doubt some of those tired and hungry Confederate soldiers stopped over here at the Dollar General to get some supplies. And it all happened out that way 158 years ago. Now, the Gettysburg battlefield is huge. And even the first day's battlefield, which is much smaller than when it's spread out over subsequent days, is huge. But generally speaking, most of the fighting was done over here to the west of town, where the limited Union forces in the area tried to stall the Confederate forces coming up the Chambersburg Pike, I believe that road is called, so that the rest of the Union, the Northern Army, could concentrate up behind them on the high ground beyond the town. First, General Buford with his cavalry, and then General Reynolds delayed the Confederates over there on that rising ground called McPherson's Ridge and held out for a long time before eventually being pushed backwards through these fields up over here onto Seminary Ridge, named for the Lutheran Theological Seminary that still stands right there in the center of your screen, where the cupola provided quite a lookout for 1863. There were no drones back then to spy on the enemy, so having a lookout point like that was absolutely crucial. If you'd have stood up there 158 years ago, you would have seen a couple of crazy things down here, that's for sure. Get it? Cupola joke. Now, there is a museum in the seminary that you can visit, and you can actually apparently get up inside the cupola. I really like saying that. But honestly, although I've read a lot about the Battle of Gettysburg, I've never paid much attention to the first day's battlefield. So I think I'd like to spend a little more time exploring outdoors instead of getting stuck in a museum. I'll be honest with you, there's a couple of interesting things that I wanted to check out since I knew I'd be coming back to the Gettysburg area. Tomorrow, I want to tell you about something freaking insane that used to be right on the battlefield, basically. But I figured what with today being the 158th anniversary of the battle starting, it'd probably be a great chance to go to the first day's battlefield and see reenactors and cannons going off and nothing. It's just quiet. Just me and old Martin Luther today. And I promise you, once we're done with my history digression, I mean, how can I not get excited about the Battle of Gettysburg, right? We'll go back to the van, back to the hotel, and I'll tell you all about my plans for recrossing the country, such as they are anyways, at the end. But first, I think it's time to wrap up here on Seminary Ridge and head off to see something else. Oh, look at these guys. Look at that. One more blue, one more butternut. All right, we've now come up here on the next hill on McPherson's Ridge, where, as you can see, Union guns were placed to try to hold off the Confederates. All along here is where the cavalry held back the rebel army until General Reynolds could get here with some infantry. And to call this contested ground would be a serious understatement. There was all kinds of fighting going on here. And just imagine the cavalry's relief, Buford's relief, when Reynolds shows up with actual soldiers, infantry soldiers. He was commanding his men to drive the rebels out of these woods and back to a creek behind it called Willoughby Run, I think, when he was struck by a bullet and mortally wounded here at Gettysburg. His last words were, "Forward, men, forwards, for God's sake, and drive those fellows out of the woods." And here's a monument to General Reynolds right over here in front of those woods. Those men being the famous Iron Brigade that was fighting right here in these woods, pushing the rebels back. It is hard to come here and kind of cold turkey get your head into what it was like 158 years ago, thinking about the screams and the shouts and the smoke from all that black powder, making it almost impossible to see the enemy coming out here, and the desperation these guys must have felt. They knew that if the rebels took the town too early and got beyond it to the heights, they would no doubt lose the battle that was going to happen here. And this was the decisive battle, both sides thought, of the Civil War. If Lee could defeat the Union at Gettysburg, he might be able to strike Washington, D.C. He might be able to convince the politicians in Washington that the war wasn't worth fighting. And Buford and Reynolds understood this. They understood that if they lost the ground here, they might lose the battle, and then they might lose the war. So it was absolutely beyond essential that they push the Confederate soldiers back to Willoughby Run, back to the creek, and give the bigger part of the Union Army that was west and south of town a chance to catch up and consolidate. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yes, it's hard to put your brain into the battle cold turkey. I get that. Brigade, division, corps, this commander, that commander. There's so much information here. That's why the best thing to do your first time at Gettysburg is get a licensed battlefield guide. Take one of the bus tours. That'll get you around the battlefield. It's probably the best way to get an overall picture of what was going on here. But while I was home without the van, I was reading books about Gettysburg and getting all into the Iron Brigade and the struggle they had here and all the screaming and dying men and, you know, people's soldiers' memoirs with all the vivid depictions of what it was like out here that day. The heart-pounding fear and anxiety these guys felt as they heard the rebels that they could barely see down there by the creek screaming with their rebel yell. We tend to think of the Civil War in like black and white or sepia tones. Everybody's so prim and proper, dressed nicely, very 19th century, very Victorian and classy in the way they phrased everything. And we forget it was like Saving Private Ryan out here. I mean, bullets flying, people dying, the trauma that these guys went through, seeing their best friends fall right next to them. And that's the thing about history, right? It takes knowing the details and having an imagination to really make it come to life. That's why a bad history teacher that's just telling you dry facts can really ruin history for people, when really this was some grim and intense and really serious stuff going on out here. And although people from the past may not have been perfect, you find out that guys like Buford and Reynolds really were heroes and why they were so revered in their day. And the more you learn about it, the more important you realize a place like Gettysburg is. And the more you realize just how much we take our union here, the United States, for granted now, and just how much had to be sacrificed to preserve it. Trying to decide now whether I want to go down and see where the Confederates were, or whether I want to check out where some other fighting happened in an unfinished, at the time, railroad cut where all kinds of men from both sides were basically slaughtered. It's wild out here when you know what's going on. And I must admit that although I'm a little disappointed that I'm not seeing like full-on reenactments or anything today like I was hoping for, I'm having a field day out here with this. Having a blast, in fact. It's a real ball. Yeah, dude, we gotta go down to where the Confederates were at, by the creek. You can see here is a monument to the Iron Brigade. And when you read some of these guys' descriptions of, you know, how they perceived the enemy down here in the woods and in the smoke and haze, and hearing all the screams and explosions and bullets whizzing through the air, I mean, then you realize just how insane it was, how terrifying it must have been. And in a lot of cases, the make or break of a given engagement or a battle would be whether or not the guy on the left of you and the guy on the right also stood firm, because if you're looking around and guys are hesitating and they're backing up, you're gonna panic too with all of that going on. So to win these battles literally took sheer will and bravery. Ah, look at this. Now we're seeing some Confederate plaques down here. Imagine being in the Iron Brigade, coming down here, trying to push the Confederates out, and you're met with this. You're met with woods, and there's smoke and haze, like I was saying, screaming. The infamous, terrifying rebel yell is coming out of the woods from down there. Dude, it must have been horrifying. It would be like going into battle against a bunch of banshees or demons or something down here. Just like I'm probably going to battle with a bunch of mosquitoes right now and not even knowing it, and ticks. I should have worn pants. Just me walking around in here, this is terrifying. I'm not superstitious, but I'm a little stitious. A little bit worried about ghosts. Oh, I'm not gonna lie to you, it's actually really scary. Just me by myself coming down here. I imagine it'd be a little bit less scary if there was a bunch of guys with you, but then again, it would be more scary because there'd be bullets and screaming and guys shooting at you. Oh, here we are, look at that. Willoughby Run. I think that's what it's called. You imagine the creek would have just been full of bodies and people bleeding and trying to drink from the bloody water. Holy crap, man. If ever a place was haunted, this might be it. I'm just picturing guys having to go back and forth across this and slipping in the blood and the mud and, oh, just desperately thirsty. Then you got to think of the guys on the fringe of the battle, the guys that get left behind or lost or wounded, and then they're creeping through something like this. The roar of the battle gets farther and farther away. You're creeping through, and you might run into somebody also creeping through, or a deserter from the other side or something. It's just absolutely insane once you start thinking about it. Gosh, this is really spooky. Full disclosure, I'm not one of those people that I'm like, oh yeah, I believe in ghosts. I have seen what other people say is ghosts. I've seen some scary, weird, unexplained things now in my life. I don't know what I saw, you know, I don't know what to ascribe it to. Spirits? Maybe, who knows? There's a really good podcast if you want to learn more about Gettysburg called, I think it's called Addressing Gettysburg, heck of a title. And they have a Ask a Battlefield Guide thing on there, and one of them was like, you'll notice that the town is haunted. There's ghost tour after ghost tour. The battlefield's not haunted at all. Where's the ghost tours? It's because you have to be a licensed battlefield guide to give tours on the battlefield, and it's closed after dark. But I don't know, dude. If there were going to be ghosts, you'd figure if the town is haunted, this place has to be 10 times as haunted, right? Let's get the heck out of here. Oh, snap. My legs are going to be haunted by ticks. It's so quiet right here, right now. Just look at this, give you a little taste of what it's like out here. It's not like the soldiers were taking well-trodden paths. They're all spreading out to the left and right. Just crawling through this. Imagine it full of smoke. Couldn't see anything. You just have to hear the enemy. I know there's some descriptions of battle where men would talk about lying down so they could try to see the enemy's feet under the smoke sometimes so they'd know where to shoot. Whew. Oh, it's beautiful in there in its own way, but I've never been so relieved, to be out of the woods. I'd be happy to meet and talk to some ghosts out here, but not down in there. But before I leave this area, there's one other thing I want to show you guys. An interesting story. You'll have to look it up and get all the details because the details are fascinating. Not all of the townspeople of Gettysburg fled in terror or hid in their basements. Some of them came out to fight. And probably the most colorful character that fits that description was this guy, John Burns, a 69-year-old War of 1812 and Mexican War veteran, son of a Scottish immigrant who, even at 69, which back then was ancient, balled up his fist in defiance, and in his blue gentleman's coat and silk hat left the town of Gettysburg, where he was town constable, by the way, grabbed his ancient flintlock musket and wandered down onto the battlefield, demanding that he be allowed to fight. Now, I've read a couple different stories, some that, people were laughing him off, and it took him kind of regiment after regiment till he found someone that would let him join them, and they were like, oh, you can't fight with this, and gave him a modern rifle, or modern for that time. But then there's another story that he actually got the rifle off of a wounded soldier. He convinced him to trade, and then just followed the soldiers down and refused to go back until they would let him fight. And he spent all day down here fighting with the Iron Brigade, fighting down there in the woods, in the thick of it, in the fields. But as the Union fell back, he was wounded in the arms, the leg, the chest, and they were forced to leave him behind. Now, if you were an enemy combatant in civilian clothes or a bushwhacker back then, the punishment was death. If the other army found you, they would immediately kill you. So John Burns scrambled up out of the woods as far backwards as he could get to the rear, buried his gun quickly and his ammunition, then pretended to just be a lost civilian out here looking for his wife, and convinced the Confederate troops, the surgeons, to patch up his wounds, and then hobbled back into town, where he subsequently became nationally famous as a hero of the Battle of Gettysburg. Yes, sir. Now that's a great Scot, I tell you. He even looks a little bit like my Grandpa Campbell, actually. If my Grandpa Campbell had hair. All right, let's look at one more spot from the battle. This one I've only ever seen from bus windows. I've never seen up close. That would be the legendary railroad cut. Now, as I understand it, originally it was the Union Army that was holding the railroad cut, but as the Confederates came up, they could just shoot down it, which, as you can see from how deep and sunken it is, would be a death trap. And so the Federals retreated back towards town, back behind that fence back there. And then, of course, the rebels turned this basically into a trench, that they could shoot at the Union from. So those Union soldiers came back charging across this field all the way from that fence line over there, getting shot at the whole time. And yes, some of them were in the famous Iron Brigade. And that took nerves of steel, nerves of iron for sure. What an insane charge. 30 killed, 116 wounded, 22 missing. They charged over the open ground towards the cut, led by Lieutenant Colonel Rufus R. Dawes and Colonel Edward B. Fowler. And when they got to the edge, finally, they pointed all their rifles down at the enemy and shouted, "Throw down your muskets!" Realizing they were trapped, a whole grip of men surrendered over here. I think they captured something like 230 prisoners. So definitely a legendary spot on the Gettysburg battlefield for sure. Now, even with all this brave, daring do, the few Union soldiers that were here couldn't hold back the Confederate tide, and they eventually had to retreat back through the town to the other side of town on the high ridges of Cemetery Hill, Seminary Ridge, Big and Little Round Top. And although the guides here wouldn't like me saying it, the more famous and better known parts of the Battle of Gettysburg and all of this, Seminary Ridge, McPherson Ridge, all this area became Confederate territory for the moment. In fact, just over there on the other side of those trees became the headquarters of Robert E. Lee, which was recently purchased, I believe, by the American Battlefield Trust and restored. It used to be part of a motel complex. It's now open to the public inside, and boy, does it feel good in there. Oh, that feels good. Who knew General Lee had air conditioning? No wonder he made this his headquarters. It's pretty incredible that this was saved by a sort of private organization. Like I said, it used to be part of an auto court and a motel, and was really only recently transformed to actually look like something historical, something that visitors like us would want to go and see. And that's crazy considering how famous General Robert E. Lee is and how many Lee tourists there are, particularly from the South, people who wanted to see where Lee's headquarters were. So that is some amazing work right there. And no doubt it'll eventually probably be part of the national park. One hopes. Me and Dash the Turtle are now just kind of cruising around the battlefield. I'm just keeping an eye out, see if there's any reenactments or anything that I may have missed. Who knows? I'm guessing tomorrow, when 4th of July weekend actually starts, properly, there'll probably be a lot more of that kind of thing. And like I said, there's something amazing in Gettysburg that used to be here, something forgotten. Not a lot of people know about it, it seems, that I cannot wait to show you and talk about tomorrow. As long as it doesn't pour rain on us, it should be pretty fun, and at least I'll have another chance to look for reenactors and crazy stuff going on in town then. But I'm still gonna cruise around the battlefield now, just see what I can see. Doesn't seem like much is going on though, at least not on the first day's battlefield. But you never know what tomorrow might bring. Well, I found some living history after all. Just over here by General Meade's headquarters is a barrel full of reenactors getting ready for the long weekend coming up. This lady's not even wearing a bustle. How lewd. You can see some of these reenactors have gone full Gettysburg. They look awfully hot and tired, which is how I presume most of the soldiers who weren't all bloody by the end of the first day's battle would have also looked. These crazy guys are sleeping out here under the stars in Civil War era style tents, just like the actual soldiers did, minus the minivan back there. I don't think the Iron Brigade had minivans. It's pretty amazing turning your head and seeing Civil War soldiers resting in every patch of shade they can find. It's kind of freaking amazing looking, actually. You gotta imagine this times like 160,000 dudes in blue and gray uniforms, of course. I'm just glad I'm seeing these guys out here and not seeing a stray one down by the creek over there, or I would have had a heart attack. Anyway, my suspicions are grandly confirmed. This place should be crawling with reenactors tomorrow. So I want to show you something freaking epic and kind of weird, and then we'll go out to town looking for them. I'm actually super jealous of these guys. If any of you are out there in Civil War reenactment units doing this kind of stuff ever, I'd love to come out and see what you're doing. The place we are visiting tomorrow is actually just across this road, the Tawnytown Road, from Meade's headquarters, so we'll be back before you know it. All right, now comes the part where I cruise back into town and figure out what I'm doing with the rest of my evening. When I was younger and we would visit Gettysburg on tour with the band, I always said I would like to live here someday, which is still true. You guys know me, I love touristy stuff, I love history. Gettysburg is right in the middle of tons of East Coast cities. I know Allie would love to live over here for a while, at least to check it out. It's just, if we moved over here, once London's 18 or something, of course, it's like, we wouldn't have any Gettysburg friends. We don't know any Gettys people. I can tell you terrain-wise, though, it's one of the most beautiful places on God's green earth. It's gorgeous out here. A little warm, though. Just a little. Dude, I was just making my way back to the hotel through Dillsburg, and I just realized I've played a show here before. Right here at the Dillsburg Fire Hall. Weird. All right, so what is the plan? Well, there is no plan, Jan, and you should know that better than anybody. Next up, the plan is to return to Gettysburg to show you guys the thing that I'm excited to show you. And then, question mark, I have no idea. I put the word out, try and see if anybody's around in Washington, D.C. that can let me park in their driveway or something, because obviously 4th of July, Washington, D.C., that could be a little bit intense. There's no way I'm ever going to find any parking for this guy. And 4th of July weekend being very expensive and crowded near American history sites, which interest me so much and are in this part of the country, could get tricky. On top of that, I'm planning to fly London out here to meet me, and I don't know whether or not I'm going to fly him to Atlanta or Chicago. And that is going to be a huge difference. I can either head down south, see what's going on down there in the piney woods of Georgia, maybe say hey to my friend Tyler, or I need to head back west to Chicago, pick up London, and then cruise back west home in time for Midsummer Scream at the end of the month, where I've promised to be and to hang out with everybody and do all that kind of stuff. So in between there's a lot of opportunity for adventure. It's just a matter of which direction am I going to head? And it honestly might be up to a coin toss. I think I basically have until tomorrow night to decide, all right, which airport am I going to fly the boy into? And I'm either driving all the way south and then cutting back across north and west across the entire continent, or I can head back west from here, or from Virginia, from Washington, D.C. area, maybe head up to New Jersey and see a thing or two, and then cut across the northern part of the continent all the way back to the West Coast. So it's just a matter of making that decision. And The thing is it would be great to go south and take a long journey across the south, scoop back north, do it all. I would love to do it all, but I know that because I squeezed myself into this weird time frame, having the van break down, having to come get it, having to be back by a certain time, there's not a lot of room in the joints. So to have the most, effective thing, that's the decision. Like, okay, with this limited 2-week window between when I get London and go home, do I want to go 2 weeks from Chicago, or do I want to go 2 weeks from Georgia? And that is going to be the decision. In the meantime, the new Stranger Things has come out, and Allie's already watched it, so I need to go in the hotel and watch it while I edit video. I'm going to multitask up there and prepare for tomorrow's very hot, very humid Gettysburg weather. It's supposed to rain and thunderstorm and all that, but you never can tell with the weather on the East Coast. It is very unpredictable, and so we might get rain in the morning and then be able to film all afternoon, or we might be able to film in the morning and then rain all afternoon. We'll have to wait and find out. But right now, it's time to hotel and sleep well. Right, Julio? Ah, well said, my friend. For those of you who don't know, we do have sick merch available at store.randomland.com. We do have a Patreon for if you want to support the show, and as a bonus, there's podcasts there for everybody, and for $10 up and up a month, something like that, is the Adventurers Club tier. There's a show that I do on a private Instagram for those people pretty much every day, pretty much every weekday, or I try my best. I am very easily distracted, so I should mention that. I very rarely mention that, but there you go. There's one of the few mentions. All the plans, of course, are subject to change based on whether or not the van makes it all the way back to California, or I have to put it in a ditch and light it on fire somewhere. We'll see. Julio, stand guard out here one more night, will you, pal? Thanks, buddy. Time to go rehydrate. There's always a truck. Creepy. I literally thought I heard like maybe rabbits or something. And I thought I saw people walking around in there. Ghosts! And Bufords, it is hard to come here cold turkey and just sort of put your head into the battle. Whoa, what was that? A rat? Ugh, I'm scared of rats lately. And said blah, 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 blah. I just realized that I said in a few places that it was the 158th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. I think because in my brain, if I was thinking, oh, last year was 2020, so this year's 2021. But it's not, it's 2022. So it's the 159th anniversary. Just in case I said that and confused you, or you were thinking I was dumb. Yes, I'm dumb. I can't math. My brain doesn't with the math. And so, yeah, I'm just going to finish this up. But make sure the link's down below with the thing, and you can see me be dumb again tomorrow. Oh, no! I filmed the whole video backwards!